But one of the great challenges with reform agendas is translating aspirations into actions. Free and independent media plays a vital role in holding governments to account. We certainly encourage Uzbekistan to increase religious freedom. Our approach as the United States, unwavering support for their sovereignty, for their independence, for their territorial integrity.
Thank you for your time, and it's wonderful to have you here today with us. And I know this is your first visit to Uzbekistan, and you held some senior levels meetings. So can you please tell us, what did you discuss on these meetings? What was the US message to the Uzbek partners, and what Uzbekistan expects from the US in this regard?
Well, thank you, Parvina. I'm delighted to be here in Uzbekistan for my first visit and to continue senior-level U.S. engagement to deepen our partnership, which is anchored in over 3 decades of strong U.S. support for Uzbekistan's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. My visit is also building on sustained high-level engagement between our countries, as seen in Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit here last year, and also the very historic summit between President Biden and leaders of the C5+1 nations, including your president. That historic summit issued a joint statement that affirmed the centrality of the human dimension to our partnership with this region, and the centrality of human rights, human dignity, democratic reforms, ultimately to the peace and prosperity that Uzbekistan and this region as a whole seeks. So my visit is very much in that context. I had excellent meetings, productive and candid discussions with His Excellency the Foreign Minister, whom I thank for organizing this very action-packed program. But I also had fruitful discussions with the Minister of Interior, with the Prosecutor General, with dynamic members of Uzbekistan's civil society and academic leaders, as well as meeting the first principal presidential advisor, Madam Mirziyoyeva.
So based on this fresh talks, what are the top challenges you see now, like regarding to democracy and human rights in Uzbekistan?
Well, as I mentioned, I affirmed strong U.S. support for President Mirziyoyev's ambitious reform agenda. But one of the great challenges with reform agendas is translating aspirations into actions and really creating the enabling environment for reforms to take hold. For instance, we commend the historic legislation adopted about 1 year ago, criminalizing domestic violence, which is a step forward for Uzbekistan's women and girls, but really all of its citizens. But a reform like this needs a sustained effort to ensure that all the relevant officials in law enforcement, in the justice sector, and that civil society actors and communities can all take part in its successful and effective implementation. Some additional areas of concern that we discussed are working to increase freedom of expression and media freedom in Uzbekistan, as well as religious freedom. But then there were also very important areas of progress, such as the fight against trafficking in persons and Uzbekistan's continued efforts and tremendous efforts to eliminate forced labor and child labor in the cotton industry. All of these are areas where continued U.S.-Uzbekistan engagement is quite important, but also the contributions of civil society are essential.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So you mentioned like ambitious reform agenda in Uzbekistan. How would you now describe the reform process in Uzbekistan? You know, critics say that it's been backsliding and people now are not so optimistic as they were like a few years ago. So what do you think about that?
Well, I would say for our part, the United States as a friend and partner, we are committed to helping support the full and effective implementation of the President's reform agenda. And, we recognize that it has to be a holistic effort. So earlier today, I was very honored to take part in a academic conference in collaboration with TSUL, Tashkent State University of Law, and a very important non-governmental organization partner in terms that looked at what are the necessary steps to support the effective implementation of Uzbekistan's new constitution, which offers very important guarantees with respect to rule of law and criminal procedures. And, if I had to summarize, I would say it's a team effort. It's an effort that implicates the whole of government across ministries, not one actor alone, but also needs the involvement of civil society, of domestic experts, but I think can also benefit from the support of international partners and international expertise. And I think, this gathering was a good example of how that process can move forward. I don't think it's fair to say that reform processes happen overnight or simply with the adoption of legislation. It's the implementation, it's the execution that is the true test that requires a multifaceted effort.
Mm-hmm. So, in your opinion, how long does it take, for example, for the successful reforms to be implemented?
I think it's not really my role as an outsider or senior American official to offer a prescription or judge, but I would say, this to succeed, it's really has to be an ongoing, continuous effort. For us in the United States, our Constitution in the preamble exhorts us to work towards a more perfect union. And this is really a reflection of our ongoing effort in the United States to continually improve our democracy to ensure it delivers for all its citizens. So in my view, reform efforts, ultimately, it's a continuous effort to fine-tune, to improve, and to really meet the aspirations and fulfill the potential of an individual country. I wouldn't put a time endpoint on it.
So you mentioned that you discussed freedom of expression during your meetings. So the situation with media freedom in Uzbekistan looks pretty disturbing now. So this year Uzbekistan regressed further in the Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index and losing 11 positions at once. If you read the RSF report, the outlook is rather bleak. So how concerned is the US about that?
Well, certainly, as part of our global human rights policy, the United States supports and advocates for media freedom as an essential building block of thriving, well-informed, peaceful, and secure societies. And certainly Uzbekistan is no exception. I refer you to our 2023 country report on human rights for Uzbekistan, which lays out a number of concerns that you have alluded to, including reports of the arrests of bloggers for peaceful expression, or reports of the firing of journalists who engaged in work critical of government policies. So our concerns with respect to freedom of expression, our support for media freedom was absolutely one of the key topics that I discussed throughout my very productive engagements here. And it will continue to be an area of engagement for the United States, not just here in Uzbekistan, but globally as we support universal human rights and democratic progress. I want to also underscore that the United States is offering, I think, important support in the form of our foreign assistance and the important partnerships that USAID and the State Department support in Uzbekistan. So, you know, a new $10 million civil society and media freedom support program will be coming online soon, and this will help in a number of areas, including helping build the capacity and the professionalization of independent media here in Uzbekistan, as well as helping support the development of sustainable business models, as journalism itself as an industry has faced really profound transformation over the last decade. So these are some of the concrete ways that we are working to support media freedom beyond our words.
Mm-hmm. So media freedom situation is worsening like across the whole Central Asian region, if you know, and how much of an issue is this right now in the Central Asian and US relations?
I think it's a very important issue as we work to partner with governments throughout the region to advance a shared vision of a more peaceful and prosperous Central Asia, but also coming back to the human dimension element. You know, this was an element affirmed in the C5+1 leader statement that came out of the historic summit last September in New York. And, you know, I think it's important that we recognize that free and independent media plays a vital role in holding governments to account, in informing the population, and ultimately supporting societal progress. So it's one vital piece of our engagement in Central Asia, but I would say absolutely globally. I was proud to help lead U.S. planning for the first 2 summits for democracy that President Biden launched, his first year in office. And one of the 5 core pillars of the Presidential Initiative for Democratic Renewal, our global approach to strengthening democracy internationally, is supporting free and independent media. So Central Asia is part of that, but it's certainly not the sole focus. This is truly a global U.S. foreign policy priority.
So I know religious freedom is also like on the table and is an important part of your discussion here in Uzbekistan. Well, as you know, in 2020, the U.S. removed Uzbekistan from a special watch list in recognition of the progress in this area, but human rights activists say that the country is backsliding on its promises and there are still numerous restrictions that exist. And, you know, just this year, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom published its annual report and again recommended returning Uzbekistan to the special watch list for, let me quote, severe violations of religious freedom. So what are the next steps from the U.S. government?
Well, religious freedom was another topic that we discussed in several of my government engagements over the last 2 days. And I think we had candid and open discussions on the role of religion in free and open societies. And we certainly encourage Uzbekistan to increase religious freedom, to allow all of its citizens to practice their religion, or frankly, to reject religion, free of government interference. You're absolutely correct that taking a step back, you know, there has been a positive and important opening in religious freedom in Uzbekistan compared to the not so recent past. So over the last decade, we've certainly seen a positive trajectory that was reflected in the State Department decision a few years ago to lift the special watch list designation. There are additional steps that, you know, we would welcome the government taking in the current context, including removing requirements for registration of religious organizations, removing the requirement for government approval of religious texts, ensuring that there is no official state harassment of individuals for practicing their faith. And these are topics of ongoing discussion between our 2 governments, and certainly these are areas that our International Religious Freedom Report, which is a congressional requirement that we produce annually, will examine and I think share with the rest of the world.
Well, your job is to lead U.S. Diplomatic efforts to promote democracy and human rights. Actually, read the report you co-authored about revitalizing U.S. diplomacy. So, but it's not a secret that the Central Asian governments are not doing well in this regard. And obviously, you can't come here and tell them what to do. My question here is, how big or small is the gap between the US and governments of Central Asia in understanding democracy and human rights, media freedom? How is your work done?
Well, Parvina, I'm an optimist by nature, which is maybe an important quality to have as a diplomat, and especially with this responsibility. But I will say, I come to this job also with a sense of humility and confidence. Humility in that, as I mentioned earlier, in the United States, we are continually striving to improve our own democracy, to ensure that we are delivering human rights opportunity, equity to all of our citizens. And this is still a work in progress. I also readily acknowledge that the nations of Central Asia have only been independent for a little more than 32 years. And these are nations that have faced decades of repression under the Soviet Union, domination, exploitation. Our approach as the United States, since their independence, and we were among the first to recognize the independent former states of the Soviet Union, is unwavering support for their sovereignty, for their independence, for their territorial integrity. And through partnerships like the C5+1 Summit Framework, unwavering support for their peace, for their prosperity, and their advancement. So certainly we are a committed partner in helping support Uzbek-led reform efforts that deliver this for all your people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.